3, 2, 1, Joe. Joe Sinkwitz, welcome to this TechBond conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. For all of those out there who do not know who Joe Sinkwitz is an advisor to CopyPress, the CEO and co-founder of Intellifluence, author of The Ultimate Guide to Using Influencer Marketing, tons of articles on marketing land, search engine land, on almost every other big-time content platform out there. Joe's also the principal for the reputation management agency Digital Heretix, and his specialties are selling the sites you wish to sell.
That's right. It's selling now. It's no longer buying. It's funny. It's like for the audience, like Kevin and I had a pre-conversation. So on the LinkedIn page, it says buying the sites you want to sell, and that has since flipped. Pre-Penguin, we were bankrupt. We were taking all our money from Payday and insurance. We were making $50,000 a day. So we were just taking that money and throwing it. So we were paying, a couple million for autoloans.com, $1 million for automobile.com, jewel.com, neighborhood.com. We were just buying and buying and buying. Penguin decimated that market because it was basically propped up by like 4 guys, like Patrick Gavin, myself, and a couple others. So when it dropped, you couldn't sell it because you'd be selling it for a tax loss, really. Yeah. So it got up to a reasonable level now, but we're not developing it. So yeah, I'd rather sell those things and focus on Intellifluence because that's my passion.
That's crazy. $50K a day.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. At the same time, like we had 50 employees at the time. Yeah. We grew that company maybe more out of ego than anything because it was all affiliate driven. We didn't have to answer to anyone except for a hostile board. And so we just did what we did and we didn't care. And then when Penguin like flipped that table, we're like, okay, this is done. And then, I found myself at CopyPress, 9, 12 months later.
The good old days.
Yeah.
And all that stuff was still possible. So you have a pretty extensive background in gray hat or maybe even black hat stuff.
Sure.
And then sure.
Let's call it that.
But now when you focus on white hat. So I'm curious, for the listeners and for the watchers, what does Intellifluence do exactly?
Sure. So Intellifluence is currently the world's largest warm contact influencer marketing network. And I usually have to kind of sound those words out real slowly because when I'm in sales calls quite a bit all throughout the day, a lot of the times we run into situations where someone's trying to compare us to like a Ninja Outreach. I'll say, cool, Ninja's great, but what Ninja is, it's a database of scraped contact information of 20 million something people. And you're going to have some hits in there, no doubt, but a lot of it, people don't even know they're on the list and they're upset when they're outreached. So we're warm contact. Everyone that we have in our network physically signed up. And so there's more to it than that, but that's usually the big takeaway. Everyone is able to do transactions on our network. We're one of the few that's GDPR compliant because, a big brand that I was talking to, we'll call it like a IBM sort of company, and they had a need for influencers, but they were afraid of doing all the outreach. So they had looked at, a couple of competitors. So we said, well, hey, why don't you tell us the people you want to reach out to? I'll take care of the situation, get them into our network, and then kind of slide them right into your DMs so they can, work with you directly through our campaigns.
I feel like that kind of service economy is really growing, it used to be marketplaces, and now in a lot of cases it slowly transitions into services because people still want to almost have like a one-stop shop solution where they're like, here's what I need, go out and get it. And you might still have that big pool attached to it, right? But people don't have the time to really dig through that whole marketplace.
It's
and
hard.
handle all the conversations and stuff.
But we're running into that too. It's like, at a SaaS company and you're at a SaaS. So it's essentially like, you have your software revenues from your subscription. Then we have marketplace revenue for like the transactions that are taking place. But we're also finding too that there's a big demand for service revenue where people are like, hey, you know what? I don't mind paying $1,000 a month to do XYZ, but I would pay $10,000 a month if you just take everything off my plate. Like, okay. So, I know that too, like after you get a certain level of MMR that, it no longer makes sense and you got to dial it back. We don't have any VCs. So we're going to do what we want to do until we raise money in next couple of months. And then that'll change.
We're in the Silicon Valley here and everybody's envious of that situation.
We bootstrapped for 3.5 years. So.
Yeah. That's the way to go, honestly. I feel like that economy is really growing in the right direction and getting a lot more attention. I mean, we're in TaskRabbit's
Oh, yeah.
offices right
they're,
now.
They're totally within our ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the influencer for doing everyday jobs is basically TaskRabbit.
Right. So it fits perfectly. And so, I mean, you had a major career in SEO of like 20 years or more, and digital marketing in general.
Yeah, sure.
And have that again, like that gray black hat-ish kind of background. What turned you into a white hat?
I kind of Forrest Gumped into it, and I'll cover it tonight a little bit in my presentation, where I started out kind of dark only because of it, just by happenstance. I was doing some work for a doctor that wanted to sell Viagra online. So it just worked that way. It was Alta Vista, so we were trying to figure out, if I make these modifications to the page, we can rank in Alta Vista. Viagra, we understood that there was limitations and difficulties with that type of product. Well, if I cut my teeth on that and went right into Payday Loans, it was impossible to be doing white hat all the time anyways. It really wasn't until I connected with CopyPress, where I was like, hey, I'm doing all this affiliate stuff, which was organic, paid, and email. We were cranking on email in not the best way. But then with CopyPress, it's like, hey, you know what? They have a really good idea in terms of how they're going to structure content over a period of time and how they're going to amplify that with social amplification and native ads. And so that sort of started my path. And then Intellifluence has kind of closed the loop because it's possible to do everything that I wanted to do in terms of the KPI without having to worry so much about the risk. And that was the big the dial back.
Yeah. And you also, I did a bit of due diligence and digging, and you have Marty Weintraub wrote an article on Inc.com.
Okay.
I think it was referring back to one of the SEO Oktoberfest sessions, but he basically, and I quote Marty here, wrote about you: Joe's exploits forced Google to make some notable changes.
Oh, so the Payday Loan Payday Loan update was because of me.
Oh, can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So I was running into an issue in 2012. It was just after Penguin, and we figured out that we could do some redirects to get out of Penguin 1.0, and then they clamped down on that in 1.1. You saw all the stuff in the UK, like I think, what was it, like Mr. Cuts loves Payday Loans? That was not me, it was someone else. But the situation, though, came into play where our largest competitor was a crime ring out of Eastern Europe. And the way that they were getting ahead was just doing blatant hacks, take over the domain, redirect after a period of a randomized period of time. And it was a beautiful structure, but it's totally illegal. And there was a line that I wasn't going to cross. And that was basically, I'm not going to go into illegality. I tried working with Google as much as I could. They wouldn't listen. So I got invited to keynote in SEO.com in Salzburg, Austria. So I did some live hacking on stage, and I showed how it worked. And so, I don't know, 1,000-something people. And I was like, hey, this is how Google is totally ignoring this very obvious thing where 70% of the SERPs are being supported by this garbage. And then they rolled it out. And they said it was algorithmic and it was totally manual, but fine. I caused them to make a little change. My minor footnote in history.
Minor? That's a major accomplishment.
No,
I totally understand.
They've forgotten about this by now.
Who knows?
They've moved on.
Who knows? Maybe there's still a little picture hanging on a wall somewhere in the Google Plex.
I know I was on a list for a while, but I don't think it was on a good list.
Oh, I had no idea. So that list exists?
Oh, yeah. They totally lie about it when they say they don't. They absolutely do. You've probably talked to Marcus Tandler a little bit regarding his period of time where they had a team trying to find his stuff. So, yeah, they're not dumb.
Right. No, they're not. That's very true. Interesting. I mean, still major accomplishment. So how did you learn all this? How did you learn how to live hack on stage? Like what? I mean, obviously there's a ton attached to it and a ton of development that happened there, but what got you to that point? Did you teach all that yourself, just learning by doing? Did you read a ton of books? Like, how did you get there?
That's a good question. So I have a couple undergrads and a master's. So my undergrads are in information systems and then operations and management, and then my master's is an MBA, emphasis in marketing. So there's some literature, sure, that I've read over the years. My first career is in programming. So while I started SEO in college, right afterwards, I'm like, I'm going to get a proper job, and I developed tax software, which is the most dry thing in the world. So I had some technical chops coming into it, but again, it was not just me. Over that period of time, I had a big team, and so I'd get a crazy idea and like, let's investigate this. What happens if we do this XYZ? And then, I had people doing the research and development, and they go through it and like, here's what's happening. Like, well, what if we change this? What if we change this? What if we do this? I can script kitty bit. I don't consider myself near the programmer that some of these people in the industry are. But, I made my way through.
Yeah, I think you're understating yourself a little bit. I think there's much more to you, but that's impressive and super interesting. And then, I mean, now you're very focused on the social side of things, and you have spoken a bit about social engineering before, or kind of. Okay, I see your smile. So I'm on the right path here. So talk a bit about that. Like, what's your experience? What got you on that track?
Okay, so social engineering goes kind of far back. It was all about the bluff. It was about, how do I get into this club when I'm 17, that sort of thing, and dance on stage when you're not supposed to, which happened, unfortunately. I'll regret that. Yeah, it happened when I was young. I was stupid. But social engineering, I see that still dovetailing back to search, where you're essentially trying to lead a person down a path. So within social, you might be trying to get them to use the right brand phrasing that you want to use. That's kind of where I started with that. And then it just sort of exploded, where it's like, well, hey, I can change the outcome of potential legislation if I get the perceived opinion to shift. And so with that, then it's like, okay, well, who do we have to get in front of? And you say, okay, well, here's the people that are opposed to this sort of concept. All right, well, who are they listening to? Who are their constituents? And then you're, either paying or, you're putting information in front of those people to get them to share it, to get them to comment it, to get it in the field of vision. And the reality is that whole 2% scenario driving the narrative is real. Because if you can get them to be very loud and vocal, you can make it seem like, well, everyone's apparently for this or against it or whatever it might be. So that's the direction that went. It's still very tight with SEO still, but that's kind of where I think social manipulation is really going. We did some testing on it for politics, but also I recently presented you could do it for making sure your favorite television show gets renewed. Like there's, if you look at all the successful shows in sci-fi that came back, you can follow the social campaigns that got them back versus the ones that just sort of died because they didn't have the support. But you can manipulate that support.
Interesting. That gets me tons of ideas. But it kind of fits to also this whole concept of I think it's 1990, where 1% of most communities are the creators, 9% engage, and then 90% just simply watch and
they're lurking,
ghost them. Lurking. What do you think, as kind of an expert in this space, about the 2016 election? And I don't want to make this like too political. I'm just curious because it fits so perfectly to that.
Yeah, so we actually, Terry Godier and I presented on this in 2016 on Gagged. We started our research in the summer, and we were going to do something on influence and then dark influence. And when we got the dark influence, like you're looking at ideas, and so let's go to 4chan. And so we were noticing stuff where tests would run on 4chan. They'd bubble up onto Reddit. It was like, at this time, it was like R Donald Trump. And so that's that subreddit. And then from there, the popular ones would sometimes go to Twitter and Facebook groups and whatnot. And then some of the really popular ones would actually get retweeted by the now sitting president of the United States. So that was crazy. From there, we were like, well, where does this shit coming from? Traced back Eastern Europe. But it was further than that. And we were like, okay, well, let's look at the Democratic side. Let's look at the liberals. And we saw where Hillary's campaign was astroturfing on Reddit for Bernie stuff back during the primaries. It was dirty stuff. Yes, absolutely played a huge role. Indonesia was even bigger in 2014, I believe. And then they moved to an all-digital election in 2019. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think something like 500 different election workers got killed that year. There was major fraud allegations. But in Indonesia, it's even crazier because they were buying media outlets in order to run their message. So we talk about the divergence here of CNN, MSNBC versus Fox. It's very literal there, where they basically own the fifth estate.
I mean, what should the government do, or what should we do as citizens of the web to avoid that stuff?
I mean, the best thing you could possibly do is exercise, critical thinking. That's the best possible thing. I mean, we had some loose suggestions of here's what Facebook can do, to do like whitelisting stuff. And ultimately they ended up going down kind of a similar path. I understand, like it's very easy for a guy in my armchair to give ideas, very difficult to implement and not make everyone happy. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that gets listed as like a verified news source, but where people are like, this is total horse crap. What are you going to do in terms of like the government? Like, well, for one, they could actually get an FTC with teeth. I mean, aren't we now? Like Google has 50 different attorneys general on its back, but the FTC and DOJ really aren't doing anything. So clearly, federal has failed there. It'll have to happen with Facebook. They're going to have to look at it and probably break it apart over the years. Whether it gets to that point, flip a coin, I don't know.
Yeah. What about companies? What about, or you as a private person? What if you got if you're the victim of a social engineering campaign? Is there something you can that helps you to defend yourself? There's something you can do?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, it depends like what the network is and like the policies they have for trying to figure out if it's a fake account. Like Aleda, for whatever reason, idiots pick on Aleda, and she's not someone to pick on. And so like they'll try to clone her like Twitter account or her Facebook account. And then because she has a real good network behind her, they can attack it. So maybe that's actually a suggestion. If you just have a couple followers, you have a couple people in your network, it may not be strong enough to survive an onslaught. So you could think of it in medieval terms. You need a bigger moat, so it makes it more difficult, make it economically, painful to go after you. And that might be the best route. But you can never make yourself hack proof. It's a reality.
And that's what you do with digital heretics, right? That's your reputation management and such.
Yeah, it usually tends to be something where like a CEO did something stupid and they want to make the bad news go away. And we're like, okay, well, it's not just going to go away. First, stop doing it. And then now let's try to figure out what's the extent of this damage and how can we reverse it over time and put out positive narratives and flush it.
Gotcha. So it's mostly about pressing it down the search results and replace it with
usually
things.
That's the cleanest way. Yeah. I mean, there's obviously a lot of social that goes into play just because it's so easy for a negative story to just go viral on Twitter.
Yeah.
And then once that happens, you have to figure out how I'm going to co-opt a bad hashtag and introduce a good hashtag and then drown the bad one and then start overpaying for the good one. So it pushes it down.
Yeah.
And then, move on.
I wonder how that if that has become harder with Google paying so much more attention to the user intent. Because what I've seen, and I mean, I've only been in this game for half the time that you have, right? So you certainly have much more expertise than I have. But back in the days, basically when it came to search, it was enough to add a couple of links to certain sites that would then rise up for example, for a brand or for a name. And nowadays, I feel like it's so much harder. User intent is probably just one component of that. I think it's also the Google is so much better at understanding what people actually want. But I'm saying user intent because what I see is that for brand names, it basically goes back and forth between YouTube, Twitter, like lots of the big social networks that are commonly displayed for a certain brand. So, and then you maybe have, some ammunition with Medium or some other blogs or that kind of stuff. But I feel like it's much harder to get it closer to page one. Whereas because those very, strong stories that are sometimes written, those kind of dirty stories get so many clicks. I almost feel like they're a magnet.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to attack that. So one is to recognize that the authority is not so much in the content, the authority is where it's being placed. And so you can go and place better content on those same domains, right? And so you can then focus on manipulating that. So each of those has their own little things. You're getting a lot of applause on Medium, and that's probably going to be dead in the next couple of years. YouTube, it's all about the subscribers, the comments, the views, and then search too. Like you could still use bots. Bots still work great on user intent. So you're pushing through a lot of different variant brand phrasing, and then you're having them follow through, click, and dwell. And that's usually enough. I mean, the reality is they're consuming Chrome data. They're consuming Android data. So they know when something's like blatantly manipulated. But if you're mixing it in with all your other positive stuff, it can be enough to just push it over the edge.
Gotcha. And then, how is that different? I mean, you spoke about Twitter and search and how to use hashtags, for example, to avoid negative and bad campaigns. Let me ask this way. How many inquiries do you get or requests for setting up dirty or negative campaigns? Are people coming to you and asking, hey, how can I shoot this competitor or this person
No,
away?
I mean, it actually doesn't happen as much as you'd think. We are referral only, so that helps. But at the same time, too, the requests that have come in are usually, they recognize that they could get, not in trouble, but like they're putting themselves out there. Yeah. If like someone randomly comes to you and says, hey, Kevin, I want you to, go across the street and shoot that guy. And they don't know what your intent is going to be. It's like, are you the type of person that'll say, well, how much? You say like, hey, this is wrong. I'm not going to go through with this. Yeah. So we don't have nearly as much in terms of people coming to ask us to do that. Those that do usually back it up with a story like, hey, this guy's a dirtbag. Here's all the things he's done. My client just wants him to go away. He's not going away. Can you help her out? And then it's a little bit more straightforward.
Do you still... what do you prefer? Is it more the Black Hat stuff or the White Hat stuff in general?
I mean, I like the ideas of Black Hat because it's always it's forbidden, right? It's taboo. But like my worlds have sort of mixed now where I use influencers in my ORM campaigns. Because if you have a 3.5 billion reach, you're stupid not to. So like, I have stuff that we're trying to push a narrative like for ORM purposes, and then I can amplify the crap out of it. Yeah. And just, dump truck of, Facebook shares, and that works great. So like my worlds sort of interconnect quite a bit.
Would you say there are limits regarding certain topics that you can use to amplify with influencers? Because there's kind of this classic example where, like all the tasty videos on Facebook obviously go viral within a heartbeat and they're super easy to share, but then there's other, I don't know, like some medical stuff or so that is super hard to share. Like what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And so the way that we have sort of tried to crack that is everyone tries to self-categorize what they do and what their interests are. So if you have something that's very niche, like medical or even extreme tech, and we could talk to Jonah in a little while, to Micah. I'm doing some stuff with Micah.
Yeah.
And so it's extremely technical, like penetration testing type stuff. Not everyone's going to understand what that is. And so the way you can get around it is you could talk about it aspirationally. Where you say like, I don't fully understand this, but here is how I would use it if I had a problem. So it's the same thing in medical. It's like, I don't need a kidney transplant, but these are the guys that I would use if I needed to because they're rated 5 on Google or whatever it is. Like so there's ways around dealing with a difficult subject. And then from there, I'm a big fan of taking, really complex content like a video, like a deep video, and then slicing and dicing a million ways. So you're taking out little parts for Instagram stories or Snapchat. You're taking out imagery for Instagram, proper Pinterest. You're taking transcripts and put them as blog posts. You're amplifying them on Twitter. Like you could really squeeze the blood out of a rock when you start with something complex and meaty. And when it's something niche like that, you almost have to do it because you're just throwing money down the drain otherwise.
Gotcha. So it's very kind of omni-channel, everywhere presence, kind of
I
concise.
think so. Yeah, I mean, and it's a struggle too for like as a platform, we're SaaS. So you come in and you do a task. You're getting Twitter shares, you're getting YouTube videos done. And it's really difficult to provide that strategy real time because there's, we could talk AI and machine learning be complete bull honky or whatever phrase we want to throw in there. It usually is. And we could try to implement that as a strategy, but it doesn't replace like getting on the phone like, hey guys, here's how I'd do this. Do this part first, see the results, take the end result, put it in this next thing, take it, put it in the next bucket, and so forth. That works. But there's just no great automated solution. If someone ever figures that out, then they'll make a lot more money than I do.
Yeah, I think some of these things are better not automate it, right? I mean, that's where a lot of the quality comes from, especially when it comes to social engineering or any social type of marketing. I think it's, and that's just my impression, as a kind of more or less of it as an outsider, but I think it's so hard to automate still, and so hard to maybe some of the execution, okay, that's fine, but having that empathy and that almost that feeling for the reception from a social standpoint of view or from an emotional standpoint of view, I think that's going to be super hard for a machine to replicate. Maybe based on certain hard signals, right? Like maybe based on like a feedback or like a response signal, but just setting up the campaign and having that kind of first draft or first step, I think is going to be really hard for a machine, right? To just say, hey, I have a product and I want it to be go viral on Facebook or Twitter or something like that. I think the execution is probably going to be automatable, but that first idea is probably going to be hard.
That's really tough. And also, like, the other thing that automation fails at is the if then. It's like, what happens if this is not performing as expected? As humans, we're able to look at it and say, like, here's my obvious tweak to the situation. Computer can only do what it's programmed to do. And so it's like the program is running like, I don't know, I'm just going to keep going because this is the next step. And you could be, wasting even more money on a chain of stuff. It's like the Roomba that runs into the dog poop and it just pushes it around the floor. That's how I envision bad campaigns that are automated.
I love that metaphor. So which channel do you think is currently most fruitful in terms of virality and pushing campaigns? I totally understand that it depends on the product.
It definitely depends on the product.
Industry. But what do you see across the board as being the most fruitful one?
So in politics, I see Twitter. In things like health, beauty, and fitness, Instagram. When the niche is really, really difficult, I see YouTube because you're given the opportunity to explain everything. But then I back all of it up with bloggers.
Gotcha. So written content still all the way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like Lauren Baker made fun of me like a couple of years ago, and he was absolutely right. He nailed this. He's like, did you realize you made text link ads 2.0? I'm like, I didn't mean to, but it made sense because we're onboarding so many bloggers, and then some of the people coming in were just using it to buy blog posts. So I might as well use them because you take those YouTube videos and you embed them in the blog post. You're able to drive secondary views as well as all the SEO benefit you're going to get. So I always like to backfill. And then, whatever the KPI is, whether it's sales, you're doing branding, there's always a good way to get some SEO out of it.
Good old SEO. What was one of the campaigns that you're most proud of, or that you have seen somebody else doing that you thought, oh my gosh, this is really good?
So I mean, there's definitely some brands that we love. We do a lot of work with GhostBed, Rich Bernstein's group. They've done a phenomenal job. We did a bunch of videos and Instagram stories and Instagram posts, and we pumped them back through blog posts, and we're disclosing everything. So like that's what's awesome about the influencer industry. Is a quick side note. The efficacy does not decrease when you disclose that it's an ad. That's really important because now you're like, you don't have to worry about FTC breathing down your neck about no follow, et cetera. Just go ahead and disclose. It's no big deal. And now that no follow is, a signal that Google has to pay more attention to because they're not really sure what's going on with it. We always sort of thought that case, but now it's even more that it just sort of works. But anyways, so GhostBed, what I'm proud of is, they were really one of our first managed clients where they had an idea and we executed, and then we came up with ideas and did more, and it just kept going and going and going. And they've been doing great. Their traffic's up. They're selling a lot of beds. So I can't complain about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Scotland.
Hello,
filming
Andrew.
us while we're being filmed. Gotcha. And do I remember correctly that FTC kind of forces now influencers to disclose when articles paid?
It's really funny. And so they don't force anything.
Gotcha.
It's kind of vague guidelines and you should disclose, but we're not going to tell you what that means. And that's the state of the industry right now. The bigger you are as an influencer, the more that you should definitely disclose. Like we talked to the Kardashian family. So Kim, she can get $500,000 per simple branded post on Instagram without adding anything to it. Just plop it in there, $500,000. Obviously, it behooves her to do the hashtag ad, hashtag spawn. Her sister Kendall has not been doing it. She does it more now, but there's a period of time where she was promoting Fit Tea heavily. And so everything she was doing involved Fit Tea. She wasn't disclosing any of it. The FTC does eventually crack down and tries to make an example out of people. They made an example out of Machinima, who was doing a campaign with Xbox on YouTube. And all they wanted was high gaming YouTubers to just show footage of using the Xbox 360. And I don't know how many units they sold, but they sold a lot of units. And what was interesting, though, is you look at it, it's like it was Machinima that came to an agreement with FTC, not Microsoft. Oh. So, like with us, we're not really sitting in the middle. We make the handshake, but like if Kevin Indig wanted to come in through and like do a shady campaign with a bunch of influencers and he got caught, he couldn't say, well, Intellifluence made me do it. And he was like, it's a SaaS. You did it yourself. But if I was running a managed campaign and I did it for you, then it's another story.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. And puts you in a pretty good position also. So what do you see as in terms of the influencer industry and influencers themselves? What do you think makes them most successful? I'm really speaking about the kind of 0 to 1 step, or the maybe 1 to 3 step, instead of kind of the small Kardashian sister.
Oh yeah, I mean that isn't going to happen.
What do you see as kind of a common path of influencers of how they develop their audience?
Develop an expertise, work with people in the industry, and then be judicious about what you do, and all that. So that's half of the book that I wrote, actually. So half was for brands and agencies on how to use them, and the other half was like influencers. What do you do? How do you start? It's like, what are you good at? What are you passionate about? What do you like to do? And that goes a very long way. And so I use like makeup as an example. If you're a makeup influencer, that's cool. But what if you became the person that specializes in, I don't know, like eyebrows or something, or maybe even a certain technique within eyebrows. And over a couple of years, you're the account that everyone else follows when it comes to that specific eyebrow technique. You establish yourself as an authority, and every new product that comes out that talks about that is going to want to be put in your hands. Gotcha. Where maybe you only have a couple thousand people, but you're the person. I'd say focus very, very niche initially, and then back it out in generalization as you get bigger. And it's kind of like SEO. I started out as just the guy that kind of knew how to do some stuff with links at scale, and it just sort of backed into other stuff.
Yeah, it's also like business, right?
Yeah.
Where if you start up, you look at the smallest kind of audience you can target, and then from there you grow out. So it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
And then that influencer book that you wrote, and I'll add the link to the show notes, of course. First of all, what was it like writing that book?
It was hard.
I asked Cindy Crum the same thing with her mobile SEO book, and she said her initial reaction was exactly the same.
Well, so I realized going from SEO to the influencer world that I was not immediately perceived as an expert in influencers. I was like, how do I carry over the expertise? The best way that I thought to do it is like, I'm just going to write a book on this. It'll come from an SEO, skew, but I'm going to shift it and mold it into what I need it to be. And then I segmented it out like, here's all the chapters, and each chapter is going to be a mega blog post. And so I just did it every couple of weeks. That was something I had to do, devote 8-10 hours to do the writing or whatever it took, and then thankfully I had Andrew to edit all my nonsense into usable stuff. And then at the very end, we had 2 big guides. Put them together, worked with CopyPress actually for another round of editing and getting it formatted for books and all that. It was hard though. Don't just jump into it. Like, have a plan.
What was the hardest part? Was it just the writing?
It was the end of it, I think. It was like just getting it launched was such a pain. And I recognize, that publishers now have it easy, comparatively speaking. But, getting all the stuff formatted correctly for the ebook in the Amazon store was hard. Getting all the fonts and stuff in the right, color depth of the words on page and all that is not my world. And therefore it was hard. But actually doing the writing and following through, that was not too bad. And of course, like any work of art, any blog post that you put out there, there's always going to be a couple people who are like, this is terrible. And like, okay, but it's harder the more time you put into it. Like, come on, it took a year.
Yeah, people are not appreciative like that. But then again,
especially if you get to them for free.
yeah, oh yeah, that's the worst.
It
Because
is.
then it means nothing. Right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they're the worst customers to have.
That's why, honestly, like I'm thinking about, like at some point in the future, I'll certainly write a book. But that's why I see some people in the industry actually, SEOs, digital marketers, some CMOs, starting their own kind of paid communities where they simply put out their content, and it works pretty well. There is some good money to be made there, and it just comes back to this weird cognitive bias that people think because something is free, it has no value, which is
communities. Actually, I'm a big believer in communities. So obviously, we've built one with Intellifluence. We'll have our own back end community for all the influencers and whatnot. We're in TTT. You know that the Traffic Think Tank. That's a good community. SEO Book was a phenomenal community. There's a community with all these meetups. One of the reasons I'm doing the conference series is so we can build a community and I can back them all into Intellifluence. So there's a lot of reasons for getting in bed with as many of those communities as possible and provide value. If all you do is provide value, you'll get everything you want out of it.
I totally agree. I 100% agree. And I wrote this article, I think it was 1 or 2 years ago, about communities kind of being the next kind of growth lever or kind of growth opportunity for businesses. And I think it was a bit too early, but I think there's something to say about people having tried out like the largest possible community, like a Facebook, where you have almost 3 billion people worldwide connected, or maybe we're at that point already. And then realizing, it's actually too large of a connection. I want to niche down. Yeah, it's too much noise. And that's where I think Facebook groups are so much more prevalent at the moment, and everything goes into that direction. Plus, Facebook recognized that as well. I mean, they're not stupid, right? Like they see exactly what people respond to and what not. And I think that's why I get the impression they devalue the feed a little bit and emphasize groups a bit more, plus stuff like WhatsApp and Messenger, which in itself are also some sort of communities.
Yeah, and in the book, The Facebook Effect, they go into real deep detail on Facebook groups, especially in changing Mark's view in terms of like how Facebook could be used as a utility, where it helped to organize people that were upset at it was in South America. It was a South American country, and like it brought together like half the country. It was just like, it's crazy how quick it happened and how it allowed for rapid organization. So I agree. I'll take it the next step further too. So you can have organization of people in like a group, but if you also gate it, the whole free versus paid, make it like a little tiny hurdle for them to have to go over, all of a sudden the quality spikes.
Yes, 100%. I see that in the communities you mentioned as well. And it takes some grooming, right? I think there are different life cycle stages of a community where at the beginning you have to put in a lot of effort to get it started and get it to that height you want it to fly at. But once you're there, it's almost like a self-driving thing, and it's almost like a flywheel, right? And then you just pour in and you slowly develop it further. And it then becomes a beautiful thing that brings so much value, whether it's benefit or it's just the kind of idea of giving back and helping people out. But SEO is a perfect example for that, because SEO is a tight community that gives back so much, and is really the whole job profession is depending on it being a community that shares results and findings.
You have to now. Yeah. Like in the early days of SEO, it was possible to be a Renaissance man, where you kind of knew a little bit about everything. I had this conversation with Cindy recently when we were at Ungagged in Los Angeles, where I was like, look, I sat in your talk. I understood a lot of it, but not nearly to the depth you do. I'm like, it's gotten so fragmented to the point where like, if it's mobile, I'm just going to go straight to her. I'm not going to try to invest that period of time to become the plumber, as it were. The plumber analogy, they come in, they hit something on the hammer, give you a $500 bill, 92 cents for the damage to the hammer, and then $499.08 for the expertise. That's where it's gotten to. Yeah. So like you have like the tech SEO is extreme like JavaScript guys. Like, I'm going to go to Bartosz, I'm going to go to Eric Wung, and like, guys, how is this really working? Like, it just no longer is possible to be an expert in all these little fragments. So you have to have the community. Yes. And you have to give them as much as you get back.
Yes, for sure. If you don't provide value, you're going to get nothing, which is a fair deal. One thing I wanted to come back to, speaking of expertise, and Cindy, who also wrote a book, and you wrote a book, and you said you wanted to really get into that kind of industry and field, and so you just forced yourself to learn by writing it down. Is that something that you do a lot if you want to learn something? Do you write about it, or what's your approach to that?
I don't really think about it too much in terms of like wanting to learn stuff. I make 3 lists every week and I follow them. So I make it's a long story. It's a long habit I've had where I'll blue sky once a quarter and then once a year. And in this, I try to get everything that I could think of and I start segmenting them out. What are things that are going to make money? What are things that are going to cut costs? What are things that I can't easily quantify? And then I try to do it further. Like how much investment's required for each of these items? What's the expected payoff? How much time? And then I try to rank as best I can. And all I try to do is just do as much value as I possibly can that particular day. In some of those cases, it might be just I need to go do something, and because of that, I need to learn how to do it. So maybe that's the answer. I just throw myself into it, and I either figure it out or I find the person that can figure it out.
Interesting. So now we're getting into why you are able to do so much. So just to rephrase it in my own words, you create separate lists, like once a year, once a quarter. You write down all the things that you kind of want to do. You quantify them by expected outcome, effort, those kind of things, and then you kind of stack rank them and do what provides the most value and the highest returns with the lowest effort. Is that how it goes? Yes,
and so and there are going to be periods of time. So you have these big overriding lists, right? But then it becomes disadvantageous to put them all in like your weekly task list. You're never going to do them all. And so you'll start to feel bad that you didn't accomplish much. So I try to do my best to chunk it out in terms of here's the things I really want to accomplish this week. You just try to knock them out. And the weeks where you're feeling like depressed or anxious, things aren't going good, give yourself a lot of easy wins. And so I'll take a lot of the things that are going to provide value, but are maybe not as hard. And you just knock them out and you're like, you know what? I'm pushing everything forward. Everything's going in the right direction. When you're burnt out, that's when you look at the third list. Like, maybe I need something fun to do. I generally don't like the third list. I prefer to focus on the first 2 because that's just where all the action's going to happen. But we did the same thing, like, over the roadmap for Intellifluence, the 5-year roadmap. We're still executing on it. And it pisses off my Eric Kaufman. He's like, of course it's on your fucking roadmap. Why do I bother bringing it up? Like, no, keep giving ideas.
I love it. So how were you able to, I feel like that's really hard to create a 5-year roadmap and execute on it still after a couple of years, because I feel like what often happens is it gives you the right things to do for the first year, but then you get to a point where you have to reevaluate and pivot slightly and prioritize other things.
There's definitely things that we've cut out. We're this no longer makes any sense. And there's things that are like, hey, actually this shouldn't be year 5, this should be year 2. So there's some of that happens, but on the rough path, we're still very much doing more or less what we thought we'd do. I think the reason for that is we set out with an idea for like, here's what we want to be. And we know it's going to take several years to get there. And then we know we want to be something else afterward. So we want to be the largest influencer network, period. Now, we're currently the largest warm contact, but we want to be the largest just in general. Yeah. So we want millions of influencers. We want hundreds of thousands of brands using us. We want to be the Facebook of influencers. Beyond that, we want to do something where we're basically like anyone has the capacity to buy influence of anyone else in the world. That's one of those, who knows, pie in the sky, $1 trillion sort of things that may never materialize. But that's what we want to aim for. And so in order to get there, we know we have to follow a rough path of functionality. So that's why that 5-year roadmap's, we're plodding along.
That's pretty smart. So, and I was curious because I think it's so hard, but it seems like you're doing this really well. And to me, it seems that the key is to have milestones, but not in terms of what you want to do, but in terms of who you want to be at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And like, because it helps to back into what you're going to have to do in order to be there anyways. So it's like, we want to have, 10,000 brands. Well, how do you get there? Okay, well, we know that in order to get there, here's the communities that we want to be a part of. Here's how we're going to, grow. Here's how we're going to go here. Here's how we're going to go here. A lot of the stuff doesn't work and you have to reevaluate, but by and large, it's been a good path.
Sounds like
I'd recommend doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. And also probably also personally for yourself. But coming back to the influencer industry, I know it's pretty hot at the moment. It's like the hot new thing and everybody wants to do it. I think not a lot of people know how to do it right or suck at it. Yeah. But where do you see the industry going in the future? I mean, obviously you wouldn't be invested in it if you didn't expect it to grow.
It's going to go down to 2. Yeah.
But what do you see coming? What do you think? What do you see changing also?
So we started in 2016 and we identified roughly 50 to 100 pseudo competitors of one way or source. People that are in influencer agencies would kind of fit that bill. Within like a couple of years, we were like 500-600. So like we saw it just explode. So the industry, it's going through a lot of turmoil where there's people that are getting consolidated. People that raised too much money couldn't figure it out. So like Tap Influence, they were the one everyone's gunning for. They had they had a really slick looking solution, but they couldn't figure out the monetization right. And then they did raise money. And so they had to sell for pennies on the dollar. And so that just happened and they got wiped out of the market to IZEA. And so we've seen this happen a couple different times where the people that raised too much money. And so that was kind of a signal of like, don't raise the money until you know that you have the fit, and then only do so if you can grow profitably from that point on, because we never know when money's going to be hard to raise. I'm not good at raising money. I don't do it a lot, but I'm going to raise $5 million next year or else I'm going to die trying. So this is just how things are going to play out. There's going to be a lot of small competitors that come out. The guys that could figure out their niche, they might stay around for a long time. There's a dime a dozen that are influencer, Instagram centric, and they have an app. And like, well, what do you get? And you get the same thing you get all these other ones. Like, how you differentiate it? What are you doing? How are you providing value to the brand? And then it just becomes a branding game. Yeah. I'm like, well, crap, how do I going to win this? I'm going to spam the crap out of everyone. And so, we are very aggressive trying to onboard influencers, because I firmly believe that the larger I could make that network, the more they're going to organically pull in the brands, because we set up some flywheels for them to be trying to constantly bring other people back into that network. And so in doing so, they'll help me get to where I need to be.
Gotcha. So it's the same principle of providing value to get value and provide kind of a hook or a strong pull for these influencers to come to you.
But the branding is the hard part. There's no clear winner. Like if you say like influencer marketing, oh yeah, obviously it's this brand. And I want it to be Intellifluence, but it's clearly not right now. It's going to take a long time. And so we know that we're going to have to invest a lot of money in order to get there.
Gotcha. So you were not joking when you said you want to raise...
I'm going to raise $5 million. Yeah, I'm going to give up 20% of the company, raise 5.
Love it. Because I know that there are quite a couple of VCs watching this and reading the newsletters. So my VC friends, reach out to Joe.
I'll take your call. I'll give you the spiel.
I would love you to raise that money, because I know you're doing a great job and you're a super bright guy. How do you think the Instagram removing likes plays into
I love
influencers?
this. So I actually really loved it, because likes was such a useless engagement metric. And so like if you were to walk through a platform tonight, you're like, okay, I'm going to use Intellifluence, I'm going to do Instagram. There's not even an option for purchasing likes, because there's no point to it. Yeah. It was the same thing too. Like, now like people say, well, how are you going to engage? How are you going to measure the engagement? You're going to be looking at the comments anyways, but even then it's not that great. You're going to be talking about like, well, how can you measure through the actual clicks? Instagram obviously makes it really hard for that, unless you're like over 10,000 followers and verified, or business account. There's some restrictions, but there's coupons and there's ways to do it where you can measure that traffic. But like, I was totally okay with them removing the likes, just because it really pissed off people that were selling fake stuff. Like I have, that's a pet peeve. We're like, buy this package and I'll get you 1 million likes on Instagram. What's their KPI? Is their KPI really likes? Maybe they have a boss and they're trying to get their bonus, in which case, valid. Yeah. But is it a good KPI for the business? No. So like, I was fine with it going away.
Do you expect more of that to happen? Maybe across
Sure.
Twitter,
I mean, maybe Twitter. That'd be interesting. I think less so on Twitter, because Twitter uses the likes now to inject back into your feed. And I think they have to have at least some data to show that it's worth them doing it. Because when they started treating it almost like a no follow retweet, it started surfacing new information. So I don't know that they'd pull back there. I could see them maybe pulling back in Facebook if they have data to suggest that it's not worth doing it. Or maybe they'd start providing a range of, reactions. Yeah. I think each network's a little bit different. I think the networks themselves are actually the biggest competitors to the whole influencer world. But at the same time, they're always looking at it from a scale perspective, and they want to prepackage things in terms of like, get certain number of clicks, and they don't necessarily are going to be diving into these individual relationships, which is what the influencer world is all about. That's hard to do. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think SEOs are missing on influencer marketing? Why should SEOs pay more attention to influencer marketing?
Well, I mean, I think it's. I don't want to say it's converging. A couple years ago, I was like, look, the press world, the PR world, SEO world has to converge. I still believe that. I think you can get a ton of SEO value getting good press wins, not PR reports, but really good press wins. I see sort of the same path now with influencers. Specifically, like you can get a lot of SEO wins using influencers, and some of those influencers have blogs. Some of those influencers are putting out video material that's linking back to your site in the description on YouTube. So like it's so intermingled that you can't really just extract it. That's where I see this going. So they have to pay attention to look at all these signals that can drive positive user signals back to your site. Just focus on that. Can these people send traffic that converts? If so, forget about SEO. Make money, and the SEO is going to benefit you anyways because you're providing value to that user. And that cycle continues.
Makes perfect sense. What are some of the social networks that you see up and coming, or especially from an influencer perspective? What next social network
TikTok.
do you see? TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere right now. It's also, though, one of those networks that could just immediately die too, right? Yeah. It's like my issue with TikTok is, I loved it when it was called Vine, and Vine was fantastic, and then Twitter ruined it. Yeah. But like TikTok, it's the same thing. It's a younger crowd. It's really hip. It's moving, but it's also owned by the Chinese government. So like you run into the risk of like if there's enough backlash, it could lose steam just as something else here is picking up. Twitch has been doing great. Twitch kind of follows that standard Amazon model of just operate in the background and keep getting efficiency wins. The more they do, and they just keep slowly pulling people off YouTube for Twitch constantly. And so that is just going to give them a ton of value over time. And they started out niche, like we talked about earlier. They started very niche. Now they're broadening out. It used to be just gamers. Now it's, follow me on my Twitch stream. Like, what's your Twitch stream? It's me cooking dinner. Okay. And then you look at them like, well, that was kind of interesting. So like, yeah, I can see it. It's Twitch. I mean, Reddit's bigger than people still realize. That's gigantic. But it's hard because there's so much anonymity to Reddit that it's hard to like build up a user base and then follow and do all the things that you would like to do. You talked to Brent Kustoris about Reddit social. He's the master at that stuff.
Let's talk about Reddit real quick, because in my team at G2, I have one person only dedicated to Reddit, Quora, a couple of other social networks. But what is the biggest mistake you see people make on Reddit besides just promoting themselves too much?
That's actually the biggest one, I think. And so I actually did this to my benefit a couple years ago. So I was a shadow CMO for let's call it a vapor e-cigarette company, and they created the only phone that you could vape.
Wow!
And they gave me all of $0 budget to figure this out. And so we got the e-cig in the vaping community on Reddit to make fun of the product enough that it got picked up in Facebook groups, Twitter, and then all of a sudden it picked up press coverage. We got featured in Playboy, we were on Verge, we were in Maxim. So there's ways to do Reddit wrong for the purpose of doing it right elsewhere. So there's that. But people that come in there and they treat it like an ad space, that's just going to fail. I think with the Reddit, the best way is like interact with the community, show that you're one of them, i.e., you care about the community, you're helping it grow, and then the advertising becomes kind of secondary in nature. Yeah. It's a hard nut to crack. It really is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I once failed miserably on a subreddit that I tried to build up. I'm not going to say which one it was, but I had that painful experience. Anyway, I learned a ton from it, and I absolutely agree with you. It's a very underrated platform that you can pull a ton out of. Similar to Quora, I really have to say.
Quora bugs me, though.
Why?
So Quora has their moderation. They don't do any real QA checks on their moderation.
Right.
So I had a bunch of material that I'd written specifically for Quora. You get one spammer go through and mark all your stuff as spam, and they just removed it, and they wouldn't give any ability to bring it back. So I'm like, done with Quora. Oh. So until Quora figures out their post-moderation QA, like, was this flagged for competitive reasons versus reality? Because there's just too much junk and noise in Quora for my tastes.
Gotcha.
Personal taste.
Yeah, no, I hear it totally.
But it drove a lot of traffic when it worked.
True. I never had that experience, but that makes perfect sense. I never realized I had that kind of gap. But I just talked to JD Prater, who's the evangelist of Quora, and I'll funnel that over to him. I'm sure that's helpful. No.
We were trading emails a while back. We were talking about doing DC, and things didn't work out. But
but it's good feedback.
We'll get him up to Napa.
Yeah, seriously, I think it would be really interesting to broaden the horizon. And speaking of Napa, you're much more involved with Jim Christian in Advanced Search Summit. Can you lose a couple of words about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, he got me drunk and I wrote a check. No, it turned out, so Jim, he was the head of SEO for GoDaddy, right?
Yeah.
And so he was doing that for years. I was doing search for years. We lived 5 minutes away and we didn't know for over a decade.
Right.
So we randomly got together. I think it was actually through William Sears. He put us together. We got together, had a bunch of wine. He invited me to come out to the conference at some point. I'm like, sure, not a problem. One of his speakers backed out a couple years back. And he's like, can you come? It's like a last minute thing. Bring your wife. It'll be a great time. So I did. Loved it. It was a fantastic time to the point where I was like, hey, let me know if you ever want to expand this thing. I'm like, here's what I want to do. I want to take Napa and I want to build a community around it. He's like, okay, let's create a new company. So we did. It's Sloppy Octopus, which is the legal entity of the Advanced Search Summit now. I am the chief mollusk officer. He is the co-flounder. And so TJ is the chief invertebrate officer. So we just go for we get together every week or so. We have way too many FaceTime calls and way too many Facebook Messenger calls. It's a good time. It's a good group. Running a conference is hard. DC was really hard because there was a city that none of us know very well. It would, we were putting together an agenda and all this stuff. Napa, it's so far ahead of track right now. Like we closed another 4 sponsorships this week already. So it's Napa's coming together great. I love Napa. I'm looking forward to it. We bought enough wine barrels we're going to have our own wine. It's a Pinot Noir. It's going to be the Bacon Ipsum Pinot Noir. So on the back, it says, our story begins with pork, bacon. And it's the pork products from Bacon Ipsum. We love it. We love that we're nerds. And hopefully the people that attend enjoy it as much as we do.
It sounds like so much fun. Yeah, I've been to Advanced Search Summit in Napa 3 times now. And it's probably one of my absolute favorite conferences because the whole package is great, right? You have the right kind of crowd, especially to me as an in-house SEO or digital marketer. You have a good variance between the topics. So it's not too much SEO. And I mean, the location is great. The surrounding is great. The whole crew is great because I feel like you guys do a really good job in kind of selecting the right people and mixing.
It's hard. I mean, we get over 300 pitches.
Yeah.
And we try to do it blind as much as we can for here's what the audience wants. We're becoming an enterprise search conference. Yeah. And we know that we have to do that when that's how we're going to stand apart. And sometimes we'll get pitches I talk about links and I talk about content and I talk about video. Pick me. I'm like, well, obviously, I don't even know who you are. You might be my best friend, but I'm sorry, this is a terrible pitch. But then we get some really great ones. We had Jacqueline from Sears that she's like, how about we talk about, how do you manage budgets and win SEO and PPC going through bankruptcy? I'm like, whoa. I've never heard of this before. And it was phenomenal. She did great. And she's coming back for Napa. She's going to be on a panel with some retailers. So we're going to be talking about retail SEO panel. I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to the old timers panel with Greg Bozer, bringing him out of speaking retirement. Will out that wheelchair. Just kidding, Greg. He's not that much older than me, so I'm right there with him.
Okay, so I'll certainly be there next year again. And so when it comes down to all of the social engineering, to Jim Christian getting you drunk and you writing a check, to all the stuff you've done in the past, what do you think is core to getting people to do things, and maybe even in line with your fundraising of next year for 5 million?
Sure.
Social engineering, does it mean to understand what triggers an emotion? Does it mean
psychological triggers matter a significant deal in getting that outcome? So I'll talk about it a little bit tonight in my presentation, but I try to start with the authority or the aspirational figure and then work down. So you're like, this is what I want. It's ADA, right? So I'm looking at, this is what I want. This person's validating my interest. Now my peers have it, so now I really need it. And then it's pile on effect of like a wolf pack where it's like, everyone around me has this, I have to be in. And I do see that within, even though I don't personally raise money, I see that happen within that VC market where like a couple VCs get in, everyone wants in. And it becomes like, it's just one of those games. I see that play out. with the influencer setup. I think as soon as individuals start to realize that there's real money that they can make in the sharing economy, like Uber and Lyft can get a bad name because of the practices, but the whole concept of being able to call a car on hire was transformative. And you see the same thing with TaskRabbit. You're like, if I need someone to come mow my lawn, I can find it real fast, and it works. It gives value to them. It gives value to me. I see that happening within social, and that's why I'm trying to push it on social and blogs. I want to be the network where it's like, I need to have the outcome I want on these networks. Got to go through Intellifluence to get that. That's where I want that to be.
How do you teach that to your kids? That this exists and that people can manipulate
Sure, they
you?
ask a lot of questions. My oldest daughters are already smarter than I am, so that helps out a lot. She skipped a couple grades in math, and she's out there. Going to go see Harvard in May, so that's cool. And she's an eighth grader. Well, congratulations till I write those checks. But I mean, I love raising my kids. When they were young, I would alternate. I'd read them a story. I'd try to have them read me a story. And then one a different night, and then the next night I might make up a story. And the following night may have them make up their own story. So I wanted to teach, obviously the reading fundamentals, but also creative thinking. Story, and telling a story isn't just about having creativity. It's also, you have to understand logic. You have to start at a point and have the person follow along on that journey to arrive at a destination. And if you can't do that, you can't sell. And so if I could teach them creative storytelling, they could sell. And, beyond that, we all have a love for math. And so we do math. One of the side projects I'll eventually do when I retire, there's over 140 books I want to write, children's stories. I distilled the top 8 MBA programs down into little nuggets of, here's the lesson I want to learn from financial accounting. Here's the lesson I would like to learn from balancing a checkbook. And then put them into children's stories so that kids can grow up with the business fundamentals. It's something that probably only sell well in San Francisco and Manhattan, but it's something I kind of want to do after my business days are long behind me.
Yeah, and it's something that common education fails to teach people, right? It's these basics and these kind of regular things, especially when it comes to accounting or taxes. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
Yeah, taxes especially. Marketing is one of those things.
Yeah.
Human resources, when do you hire someone? How do you fire someone?
Yeah.
And that's it's a hard thing. It's never gotten easy for me. But at the same time, you understand, if it's time, it's time. And so it'd be a great fun thing to tell a story about waiting too long and the implications, this other guy, you could have had Susie come and join your lemonade stand, but
Totally. I could not agree more. And first of all, I have a very strong feeling you'll raise $5 million next year.
Thank you.
I would almost bet.
The only reason I wouldn't do it is if the bootstrapping takes off too much, and then I just don't need to.
Sure.
But I'm planning on it, so
the
why
second
not?
thing, I hope you retire really quickly because the world needs those books.
No, I really like working though, so.
Yeah. No, I feel you. And also, I wanted to very quickly nerd out on intermittent fasting.
Yes.
I know it's kind of a 180, but I know it's something else that you're curious and passionate about. So maybe that's the bridge. We go from children's books.
That's where Reddit is fantastic. The keto thread, the keto subreddit, the intermittent fasting, the fasting. I'm deep. Let's do it.
So what is your current regimen on intermittent fasting?
Sure. So I mixed it up over the years. I was doing OMAD for a while, where I was just doing one meal a day within a 4-hour period, but I'd try to do it within a 90-minute if I could. My biggest issue with eating was not so much the food selection, it was volume. My portion control does not exist. And so by forcing a time constraint, that helped a lot. But I switched up even more. I started doing a little bit longer extended fast. I went from 24 to 48, 72. I did a 10-day fast, and I survived. And I was like, okay, well, hey, you know what? If I could do this, I'm going to incorporate. So a little over a month and a half ago, Aaron Wall and Terry Godier challenged to a little weight loss contest. We're all 3 fat guys. It's like, hey, let's do this. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to work out. I'm not going to worry about the type of food, even though I'm keto. But I'm going to work in a 72 to 80 hour fast every other week. And it's been working great. I think it's as simple as that. That's why it's so hard. The next big diet book is to stop eating for a while. And it reverses so many ill effects of, inflammation and just making your life easier. It helps you to breathe more. It pulls the water off your body. So long as you're getting the right electrolytes in your system, a guy like me can go a very long time without food.
I agree, but it wouldn't sell so well, right? It's like often that simple advice that is so. I agree with you. I totally agree. But yeah, I've had my own experimentation history with intermittent fasting. I think there was about 1.5 years that I tried all the different regimens, like a 16/8 and a 24, and then a 1-day week fast. And it's really interesting because after a while, you understand that hunger is really something that goes away quickly. It's more or less an impulse.
It's just ghrelin hormone, and as soon as that ghrelin drops sufficient level, that's why the first day is always the hardest.
Yeah.
And I'd rather do a 3-day every other week than a 1-day every week. Yeah. Because it starts to gnaw at you, but after that first day, it goes away. Yeah, it's fine.
Ghrelin, the hunger hormone. It's really interesting because there's a lot of research happening right now into figuring out how to control ghrelin and I think leptin as well with pills or with exogenous.
The exogenous ketones and stuff. Yeah, I skip those because if you're already in ketosis, don't enter anything in. Yeah. It does have to get metabolized back into the the liver. So you skip that process.
Yeah. And so one of the interesting things that I found when I did intermittent fasting is in the fasting period, I was on.
Oh yeah, mental clarity is sharp.
God.
That's why I did the 10-day. I was like, I kept reading the anecdotal stories about by that 7th day I had my breakthrough, and I was like, I felt like I was in need of a breakthrough, and I had one. Yeah. And I was like, holy crap, it kind of worked, and I hate those type of stories only because they're not backed up with hard data. Yes. It's just a personal feeling. Yes. And so there could be tugging on emotions, and a lot of that stuff kind of gets pulled up when you're fasting for a long time. But I did have the mental clarity required to sort of have a breakthrough. Yeah. And so I'm like, I'm doing this once a quarter. I gotta make sure I do it. I know the Valley's big on microdosing. I'm not, but I'll do my fast every quarter.
Yeah, it's certainly super interesting to play around with. And so you do a long fast of 80 hours once a quarter, you said?
No. The 80 hours I do every other week.
Oh.
And so I'm going to do a 10-day or a 7 to 10 day. So my next big one comes on Christmas is going to be my cheat day. I get one cheat day a month. And then the 26th through the 1st of January, I'll just fast. So it'll be about 7 days roughly. And then I'll end that weight loss contest so I can win and then walk away.
What's your favorite go-to food on your cheat day?
My favorite what?
Go-to food.
On a cheat day? It's usually just something I haven't had in a while. So I love sushi. So we'll just go and we'll pound a bunch of sushi one of the days. The next month it might be what? I haven't had this burger in forever. I really want the bun because it's a pretzel bread bun and waffle fries. And so that'll be it. And I love pizza. I love nachos. I love all the bad things we shouldn't love. So I just try to space them out.
Here's the audience coming in for everybody who doesn't see it. People on the outside of the office.
It's his fault. It's his fault.
Are tapping on the window like we're in a zoo, actually.
Okay.
Here we go. That's live recording. Okay, we'll wrap it up real quick. Just one last thing about nachos. I actually found this on the internet that your Amazon bio actually says beating bemused strangers in nacho eating contest.
Oh, that's because I have no volume control. And so it's just a joke, but
sure.
We've done a couple different chili pepper eating contests at work, and the chip challenge and that challenge, all that stuff. I've won every time. It's not because I have a high tolerance. I just hate losing, and so
Here we go.
That's all it is.
Another piece to the personality. Yeah. I love it, Joe. You're an absolute stud. You're amazing.
Tell my wife that. That'll really help.
She knows. I have a feeling she knows. But if she doesn't, Joe, you're an amazing stud. I still remember how I rushed through my last presentation at Advanced Search Summit, and you kind of jumped out and asked me questions about my lifts and all that kind of stuff. It just saved the day.
Let's talk about your Wilks score. What are you doing now?
I love it, man. But anyway, just such a kind and at the same time super smart person. Really admire you, and the community benefits greatly from having you. So wrapping up, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter, usually Cygnus SEO, CYGNUS SEO. My email is joe@intellifluence.com, and I answer all my own email. And don't worry, you're not going to really spamming me. I get, 1,000 to 10,000 a day, depending on the day. So hit me up there. You'll find me.
Sounds like a chill time. Joe, thank you so much for your time. It was great having you on. Everybody follow Joe on social. And thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
That was awesome, man.
Thank you.
That was great.